Hey guys, it's Roderick. I'm here with another review of The Real Housewives of New Jersey, Season 13, Episode 2, Family, 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 which it really title should be Displaced Anger. But we'll get to that in a second. So we're just going to get right into it. Y'all know what this is. This is just a good old-fashioned Kiki, one of my guilty pleasures. All the substantive screenwriting, filmmaking stuff we'll deal with when we get to Mayfair Witches, which is a whole nother conversation. So anyway, first we get the kind of teaser where everybody is, all that type of stuff. Nothing all that super important except for the fact of Jennifer's kids, like low-key talking about her fake nose, whatever. I thought that was hilarious. So then we first get to Battle of the Gorgas Part 1, right? So Melissa's packing her bags because they're hosting an award show. She's hosting an award show with Teresa and Joe's there. And they're kind of recounting this kind of like where do we go wrong type of situation. Now, I got on social media and I was kind of seeing people's comments about the previous episode. And a lot of people really feel like Joe and Melissa are kind of like using Teresa as a storyline, because they don't really have anything else going on, right? Now, and to some degree, I do kind of get that sense, right? Because at some point, if this relationship was really as important as it is to Joe and Melissa, like they seem like they talk about it, they would kind of like move to some point, the movement of resolution, right? So I do kind of get the sense that like this is really, they're kind of like stretching this out and they're kind of using this discord between Teresa to kind of be their central conflict. But I also do get a sense that they are really truly hurt. The problem is just that Teresa, her brother, and Joe and Melissa aren't really emotionally intelligent enough and are too prideful to really say, look, let's just put the past in the past and let's just start a clean slate and move forward. You're getting married. We want this to be a happy moment for you. Let's just go forward, and everything that's in the past, has happened in the past, right? So, but unfortunately, since they're on a television show where their paychecks are really tied to their screen appearance and their conflict, they really don't have a choice but to kind of keep using Teresa as a storyline or keep bringing this up. So I'm still kind of on the fence with this yet because I do think there is some genuine hurt feelings, but I think that unless, like, by the end of this season, I want to see the Gorgas, like specifically Joe and Melissa, to have moved to a place of we're either going to accept Teresa for who she is, or we're going to create a whole new dynamic in this relationship, right? Because the fact is, keep saying you're done with it and moving on, and then still getting in arguments with her over the things that she says is not evidence that you're moving on, right? So the fact is that you're still angry about what happened, and then every time there's an interaction, you still put 20 on 10 because you have what? Displaced anger. But we'll get to that because that's really the theme of this entire episode, is that everyone's dealing with anger where they're angry about something else or previous occurrence in the past, and then now they're coming and using that about what's currently going on. And the question is whether or not is that their really true emotional makeup, or are they just really putting 20 on 10 for the camera because, again, they are on a conflict-driven reality television show, right? So anyway, so first we get to Jen and Danielle. So we still have the 3-episode embargo for Danielle and Rachel. One more episode, then we can kind of discuss them. But Danielle comes over to Jennifer's house, and the kids are there, whatever. First of all, do these chicks ever cook? Like, for all these party hosting things, like, why are they not hiring chefs? I ain't seen nary a chick in this kitchen on this show, like, making anything. Everybody's unwrapping prepared food. Now, I'm not trying to be super provincial or prudish, but like, do none of these chicks even know how to cook? Like, why isn't Jennifer having her mother make some Turkish food or whatever? All we just see is them bringing like party trays and sushi and all this stuff. And I was like, really? But I don't know. I guess it's just easier if you having people over, you could just bring food or whatever. But I'm like, ain't nobody cooking? Can't nobody pretend, like, put a pot out and pretend like they cooked? Like, I don't know. So anyway, Jennifer's talking to Danielle about the situation with Dolores. And what immediately comes up and what I realize is that Jennifer is having displaced anger because of her situation with her husband. Because Jennifer's like, I'm done being the chump and letting people walk all over me. So the fact is that is how Jennifer feels in her marriage. And that is spilling out into all her other relationships because she's still angry about the situation with her husband. And the fact is, the situation with Dolores, as hurtful as it may be to Jennifer, Jennifer is not really that big of a deal considering the totality of everything. But she really feels like she has been a chump in her marriage, and now she comes to a situation with Dolores and is kind of making her feel the same way. And instead of saying, Dolores, you know what? I'm still feeling kind of tender about this thing with my husband. I really needed you to be on my side and support me. Dolores can say, you know what? I'm always your friend. I'm always going to support you, but I just couldn't get behind this. And then we can move on, right? But Jennifer, who is, I can't decide whether I want to start calling her Bellatrix Lestrange or Gretchen Wieners, right? Because she gives me that type of energy. Because she really has gone to school and studied the Teresa Gorga Giudice role of let's put 20 on 10 and let's challenge people with their loyalty. But the problem is that she does not have the depth or the wherewithal to really follow up with her threats. Like Teresa will flip a table on you. Teresa will throw a plate on you. Jennifer does not have that because she, as the folks say, couldn't squish a grape, whatever. So she definitely is not going to bring that energy necessarily with Dolores because Dolores stays on 10 ready, right? I really started this season really wanted to not like Dolores, but the way Dolores is moving this season, I am really enjoying it because it very much mirrors the way in which I would move, right? Once I tell you how I feel about you, once I let you know I'm not fucking with you, I'm not fucking with you, right? And so the fact is that I'm not going to keep going. I invited you to this party and you wanted a confetti parade because you showed up, you accepted my invitation. Nah, it's an invitation, not a subpoena. You ain't got to show up if you don't want to show up, but you showed up for your paycheck and decided that you want to get some extra work in while you're doing it. So I was like, okay, fine, right? So we see Rachel and her family, 3-episode embargo, still very cute, like the story of their stepson, okay? So now we get this whole thing where Marge's ex-friend talks to or is calling Teresa and Jennifer, right? So this is giving me a little hint of, okay, this is where the overproduction is coming in, right? Because especially in New Jersey, we always see like an ex-person from the outside contacting somebody else and telling them. If you remember Kim G, right? This reeks of the whole Kim G situation where someone comes and talks to them and then whatever. Now, I will say that they at least, now the fact that they were not willing to say what was said to them does not necessarily indicate that they're being a good friend of Margaret. It may mean that Teresa and Jennifer are again doing that Voldemort Bellatrix Lestrange thing where they're like, if the season ends up not being interesting and we need to pop off and get our coins to create a conflict, we can bring this up, right? So we'll have to see whether or not whatever they brought up or don't brought up is really because they're being a good friend or if they're trying to really low-key produce this show by determining when is a good time for them to bring this up, right? And if they already told the producers what it is, that may be out of their control because at some point the producers are going to say, okay, this is when you need to bring this up, right? So we'll kind of see about that, right? So now we get to Dolores and Paul at Paul's house. Paul's house is fabulous. I love that kind of modern style, modern decorating or whatever. And Paul is kind of growing on me. The embargo doesn't apply to friends of the show and boyfriends, whatever like that. And I'm really kind of liking the energy Paul brings. He definitely seems like he'll fit in well with the guys, very even keel, but also he seems to be a little bit more emotionally intelligent than the women, which kind of fits with this show because most of the men, with the exception maybe Joe Gorgas sometimes, all a little bit more emotionally intelligent than the women. So what I love the fact is that first of all, Paul is down the clown. He was like, I love the party. I thought it was great. And I was like, of course, because there's like a whole bunch of fuckery. So why wouldn't you like it, right? But the thing when Paul got 10 points to Gryffindor was when he said to Dolores, I have you, I got you, you don't really need him. And what he is really doing is giving Dolores, one, the security and safety to know that he's going to be there, whether or not he is or not, we don't know, but also allowing her to create the boundaries in her relationship with Frank. Instead of him saying, I'm going to talk to Frank, I'm going to let him know I'm the man in your life. No, he's like, this is your ex-husband, you're going to deal with that. I'm letting you know what I'm comfortable with and what I want as well. So Paul already started off with 10 points to Gryffindor for that because I really like that. And that shows a very healthy, mature, emotionally intelligent way to deal in a situation where you have an ex who's still friends with your current partner or whatever like that. You allow them to create those boundaries. And then when those boundaries are not created or when they're not, or when they're transgressed, then we have a problem, right? So I was all here for Paul and the whole thing. So Teresa has met with her Louis' assistant, and I'm like, do you not have a wedding planner, or are you trying to like scoot and change your wedding plans? Whatever. So they're talking about these invitations, right? So the invitations are going out, and then we see Rachel's husband was like, oh damn, I'm surprised we're even invited. And I was like, dude, don't fuck up this reality TV thing. Of course you got invited, right? Because everybody had to get invitations, right? So I was like, I mean, you could tell that he's kind of new to this reality television game, because he was like really surprised. And Rachel, they looked like, you, of course we're going to get invited or whatever. So I was just like, I just thought that was like really cute and really funny. So now we go back to Battle of the Gorgas Part 2, right? So Joe and Melissa are still talking. They're talking about LA and how like they didn't see Teresa, they didn't send the red carpet. And Joe's like being sad. And he's like, my parents would be really embarrassed if they saw the way that we were acting. And, he's kind of upset about the whole seating arrangement at the engagement and how he's not walking Teresa down the aisle. My problem with this is, let's assume Joe's arguments are really valid, right? Let's assume that this is really how he feels. Why have you not had a conversation with your sister, right? This platform is the perfect time for you to have a conversation with Teresa being, this is why I'm hurt. This is what I expect. This is what you're doing. And Teresa can say, I didn't want you to walk me down the aisle. I don't really trust you. I don't really like your wife. They can have that and let the chips fall. But when you're playing telephone and passive aggressive and throwing rocks and hiding hands, everyone's feelings gets muddled, right? Because there's a lot of expectations. Now, it was so good that they showed that clip from the season 13 episode where Joe Gorga was fighting Joe Giudice, because I mentioned that in somebody's comments or probably on Twitter, that if you go back to that episode, right, that was a very, very good episode because the therapist identified the reason why Teresa does not like Melissa. Because Teresa, as the older sibling, expected Joe to pick someone that she approved of. And Joe picked someone who Teresa did not approve of. And Teresa did not trust her brother's judgment in women. And Joe and Teresa have a very kind of amalgamous, no boundaries type of relationship. So because there's no boundaries in their relationship, now they're grown up, right? And there's no boundaries in their adult relationship. So everyone's willy-nilly jumping over places instead of like, I can still be your brother, I can still be your sister, but these are my boundaries, right? So the fact is that Joe's in a very different situation. So imagine if Joe had a brother, right? If Teresa was a man, this dynamic would play a little bit differently, right? Because Joe could talk to his brother, they could get in fist fights, they could fight, and then they'd be squashed. If Joe was a woman, Teresa would be able to, deal with this a little bit differently. But because they're of the opposite sex, and Teresa's the older sister and Joe's a younger brother, it creates this kind of like, because they have this very conventional patriarchal view of the sexes anyway, based upon their culture, it's difficult for them to really talk about and get to the bottom of what's going on, right? But the therapist really hit the nail on the head when talking about what the problem is with Joe and Teresa. So go back, it was 2003, so that'll be like 10 seasons ago, and go back and watch what's going on with that season. So maybe like the 4th or 5th season, because like Kathy and Rosie were still on and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think that whole season was all that good, but that episode was very, very good, and not just for the fight or whatever like that, right? So now Danielle's having a mozzarella party, right? Which I thought was a good idea. And we found out that she's in event planning, okay? So in the interim of this, she sets out the invitations. And then when Teresa shows up, she's like, oh my God, I have to get all new invitations because Ramona Singer from the Real Housewives of New York has let the invitations leak, right? And I was like, that's so on brand for Ramona. I just wanted to touch that anyway. So now we have Susan Fessler, who's kind of like a friend of the show, but I'm like, I kind of like Tracy because I wanted more tiki. Like, I like Susan because Susan is giving me a more evolved Ziggy tease, right? Not just because they were Jewish, because she's just giving me a more evolved Ziggy tease. Like, she could really, I felt like if she was on the show, she would be in the Eileen Davidson, this shit is ridiculous, why are you all arguing about a thing? But I think that may be why I don't know whether they're testing her out or whether, she's just not exciting enough for her to be a full castmate. But since she's friend of the show, she's fair game. And I kind of like what Susan's kind of bringing, right? So let's go talk about Teresa for a second, right? Because if you go back to the beginning of the episode where they're in a fight and all this stuff is going on, Teresa is silent because Teresa doesn't want to take sides, which is what Teresa says at Danielle's party when Dolores is talking to her about it, which I find to be the word of the day, hypocritical, because if the situations were reversed, Teresa would expect people to take sides. She would expect Melissa, she would expect Dolores, she would expect Jennifer to be on her side or to be silent, right? And the fact that, Teresa's sitting here backpedaling, pussy popping, not really wanting to tell the Jennifer girl, okay, you're doing a little bit much, because also Teresa ain't got to do that much work, right? Typically, Teresa's antics and conflicts drive most of the show. So the fact that these other chicks are doing some of the work, she ain't gonna say nothing because guess what? I'm tired of always having all my business on this show and all my shit, being the main conflict drivers of the show. So I totally see why Teresa is kind of stepping back. I just think that she has to recognize that's a little bit hypocritical because if the roles were reversed, she would expect the people in her life to be on her side too. So I was like, okay. So, so then we get to, they're making a mozzarella and they're talking and they're arguing a little mozzarella cheese guy. Girl, these sex-starved middle-aged women. I was like, he's okay. But I was just like, they were really acting like Fabio's show down there was like making them like cheese. And I was like, okay, fine, whatever. Right? So Marge now confronts Jen about their meeting with the ex-friend. And this kind of then gave me another kind of tinge of like overproduced, let's be brand new, right? Because Marge knows why they met with him, met with the ex-best friend, is because they needed some shit to be on the show, right? What Marge's complaint should have been, and what she should have vocalized to Jennifer is, why did I have to hear this from somebody else, right? So Jennifer, this shows like a gap in the game, right? So I personally believe that, Teresa can take or leave Marge, whatever. She's just made friends with her because she recognizes that, what Marge did last season was really trying to help her as part of the show. She didn't really like it per se, but I think Teresa can take or leave Marge. This is where Jennifer's game, a reality TV game, needs to step up because the fact is, you could have still gotten the same effect of going and meeting with this woman, and then you could have had a scene where you sit down with Marge and be like, ooh, girl, blah, 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 met with me, and I just wanted to let you know that we met with her. You don't have anything to worry about, anything coming out, but I wanted you to hear from me first. See, none of the girls know how to play that I wanted you to hear from me first game, because when you play that game, they're hearing it from you first, and so's the rest of the world, right? So then you get out, so then that pretty much covers your ass, because now Marge is salty because she's like, we said our beef was squashed, but you're meeting with people who I don't like. So fine, Marge, you know why they're meet with them, because the producers either said meet with them or the producers like, we need to find out what this is. And I just have a problem with people low-key, talking or snitching to people on reality television shows to get their moment of shine and then to tell them someone else's business. I just think that's just like a very distasteful way to move, right? Because if that person is your friend, just because you and that person aren't friends anymore doesn't mean that it's free game for you to go off and tell all their business just because you're not friends anymore. I just don't respect people who do that, because if that's the case, then I'm never going to tell you my business, because if we become not friends, you can just blast me all over the place, right? So I was just like, okay, girl. I was like, whatever, right? So we then get back to Jen and Marge, right? So they're talking, and then Marge is having her conversation, and Marge is telling people what's going on. And I saw people kind of on social media complaining about Marge going back and talking to the Gorgas about her conversation with Teresa. She has to do that because she's on a show, right? In real life, she would just text him like, guess what this bitch did? She had me over for cheese and crackers. No, she has to go and physically tell them what's going on, because that's what the show requires. So the fact is that in every show, especially Bravo, there's one person who's a dedicated, we'll call them bone collector, right? So that bone collector has to go and inform the other people in the cast, because it keeps a continuity of the information that's going on in the show, and also gives them another point of conflict, right? So I totally understand why Marge does that, because that's just a role that she either has adopted or the producers have tapped her to say, be the bone collector for, right? But Jennifer then decides that she's going to be big and bad and go and confront Marge and say, oh, you can't say this, whatever. This is Jennifer just having displaced anger because she feels that in her marriage, she has been taken advantage of, her love and affection have not been valued, and therefore every other instance in her life where she sees the same thing, she's, in her mind, her logic, she's going to squash it immediately because she does not want what happened in her marriage to happen in her other relationships. But the problem is that until she deals with the issues in her marriage, then her other relationships are going to suffer, right? And that's kind of what Marge is trying to say to her, but Marge has a way of being kind of condescending, which I recognize that too, because I get accused of that too. But it's like when you're looking at somebody going through something, you're like, oh my God, this bitch and this shit, right? And you're like, look, instead of doing the math equation and showing you the work, I'm gonna just tell you what the answer is. And sometimes you have to take people step by step through the math equation work and be like, 1 + 1 × 2 over 2/3 equals you have displaced anger. And that's just what is going on with Jennifer. And I can understand that, but again, it's the combination of her taking pages out of Teresa's book and her not being emotionally intelligent enough to go in before she goes out. Because if you realize, this is the same reason why her and Marge had a problem. Instead of her going, Marge has infidelity, Marge is a cheater, I was a cheater, maybe this is why I feel about this, she just goes out and was just low-key greasy mouthy to Marge, right? So Jennifer just doesn't know how to go in before she goes out. And then when you call her on being kind of like, low emotional intelligence, she gets offended, right? So I was like, okay, girl, like Jennifer, let's just see how this game plays out, right? Because the fact is that as she saw when she mentions Dolores' name, Dolores jumped up because Dolores did that jump up like, okay, bitch, I done told you I don't fuck with you. I done told you keep my name out of my mouth. What the fuck do you have? And her tone changed, right? And the fact is that if you're gonna be true to it, be true to it, right? But she doesn't have that same type of energy with Dolores that she may have with Marge, because Marge is gonna fight her. Dolores would have drowned her ass in that motherfucking pool, okay? So the fact is that Jennifer needs to decide what it is that she's doing, right? And so if you can't really try to be big and bad on the cameras, because the fact is you may just get popped, right? So we're just gonna see how that goes. Now, the best part of this entire thing came from Susan Fessler. So as Dolores and Marge and Jennifer are arguing, and Susan Fessler comes in and says, golden words, none of you two are owning your parts in this. And literally she gets shut down by Dolores, where she's like, wrong place, wrong time, whatever. And the fact is that Fessler she should have ignored Dolores and made her statement even more plainer, because that's the truth of the matter. Because in these reality television shows, especially in like New Jersey, it's you did this, I felt hurt because your fault, as opposed to being like, okay, Dolores, you could have probably packaged the way in which you told Jen a little bit better. Jen, you need to quit being so needy and thinking that you're to need all your friends to fall in line with you because you're not Teresa, right? Nobody really is owning their part of it. If you go back to the Battle of the Gorgas, it's the same thing. Nobody wants to own why the stew tastes nasty. They just think, well, you put this in, but everybody has seasoned this nasty stew of a situation, and now you don't like how it tastes, right? Either throw the stew out, make a new one, and say, we're not going to throw this ingredient in anymore. But the fact is, nobody wants to own their part in it, and this could be one of the most frustrating things about watching these reality television shows, because and maybe this is how people in real life kind of move. I don't move that way in my world. Like in my real life, if I have sensed a moment where I have wronged someone, I will immediately say, I'm sorry, I apologize, and it won't happen again. Now, if there's something that happens in which I know that I did not intentionally mean to hurt you, or that my statements were not hurtful, I won't own that, but I will let you, say how you feel, and then we can just agree to disagree about the situation, right? But the problem is but that requires some ownership of the consequences by knowing that you have a friend who theoretically has been hurt, and you don't own or you don't want to apologize, right? But nobody wants to do that. It's like blah, 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 argument, blah, 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 and then we bring it up the next argument or whatever like that. And again, I have a very little patience for people who bring up shit after I've already discussed it, after I've already apologized, and keep going. And that's kind of what Marge was saying to Jennifer, like, quit going back in the past about stuff. I thought we squashed this. But if you ain't got nothing else interesting to go on to do, and the producers are like, conflict, we ain't paid for Danielle's party for nothing, like, y'all, which and let's just talk about this. I really think that the whole thing of having a show where there has to be conflict every episode is just emotionally exhausting, probably just for the castmates and for us. Like, it would be nice to have an episode where everyone got along. Everyone was having deep moments or talking about things in their life. But it just seems to be always a superficial, kind of low emotional intelligence drama that can be kind of exhausting. Mind you, I'm here for it, but this is why this is the only reality television show that I watch, right? Now, I think we get to the end of the episode, and I have to give Teresa her flowers, because finally Teresa comes forward. As I said last week, the reason, as she let slip last week, that the reason she did not have Melissa in her wedding and kind of did the whole side thing with the engagement party is that she held Melissa responsible for Marge running around asking and talking about Louis, right? So the fact is, I have to commend Teresa for saying to Melissa, this is why this hasn't happened. Now, Melissa was correct in saying, why are you blaming me? All I said to Marge every time she brought it up was leave it alone, right? At that point, right, instead of it going from 2 to 15 out of 10, Melissa could have said, I was never involved with this. I always had your back. I don't know why you think I did not have your back. And we really could have gotten a resolution to that issue. But the problem is, every time there seems to be a point where there's going to be a resolution to one issue, they diverge off to something else, and we can talk about the engagement party and the seating and why you weren't seating, which we talked about at the reunion and whatever. And then Melissa accuses Teresa of telling a lie, and I'm not going to buy that Teresa did not know where they were sitting at the engagement party. Because at the moment when you notice your brother is not at your table, you get up, tell your brother, hey, you're supposed to be at our table, get up and move, right? Take your food, take your plates, take your drink, come over to our table, right? So the problem is that there's I'm not really buying that, because I do feel like Teresa kind of wants to, expand her family, start this new thing with Louis at the expense of her old family, and she just is not owning that and being honest about that, right? So and with Joe being her only sibling, he really feels hurt because he feels like he's being left out of this process, right? Because typically he would be the one walking Teresa down the aisle. I do think it's an unrealistic expectation for Teresa to include Melissa in the wedding ceremony, right? Because she didn't fuck with her when you first married her, and she has done all this stuff, over the years. I think that is a little unrealistic, but I don't think it's unrealistic that Joe not be included in the wedding celebration or walking down the aisle or something like that. But unless Joe is willing to take the time and be honest and vulnerable with his sister about what has happened and what is going on, and not make it be anger all the time, it's never going to translate, right? Because once he gets angry and starts yelling, Teresa will get angry and start yelling, Melissa gets angry and start yelling, and we have no resolution, right? And for your thought of the day is, most of the time, anger is just the first emotion under a well of sadness, right? So when you're acting or whatever, anger is a very easy emotion to emote, right? But the sadness underneath is a little bit different to access, because once you get the anger out, it's underneath a lot of sadness. So I think that is what we owe. The Battle of the Gorgas continue. Next episode, we can talk about Danielle and Rachel, and hopefully we're not still going on this. The previews look like Joe Gorga and Louis are about to go and get into it. And again, primacy of relationships. We always discuss that. So anyway, thanks, guys. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the alert, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.